Khắp mọi miền thế giới, người ta thích san sẻ món ăn và thức uống họ yêu thích. Và càng lúc họ dần cảm thấy thích thú với những câu chuyện kể về nguồn gốc và cách thức sản xuất. Tại hòn đảo Ireland này, ở bên rìa châu Âu, chúng tôi toàn tâm đầu tư vào mọi khía cạnh của thực phẩm và đồ uống tốt lành của chúng tôi và muốn kể cho thế giới nghe về điều đó. Mỗi câu chuyện khởi đầu rất giống nhau, với sự kết hợp hoàn hảo giữa môi trường tự nhiên và cách chúng tôi làm việc thuận hòa với thiên nhiên. Lượng mưa dồi dào nuôi dưỡng những đồng cỏ xanh tươi và các nông trang bạt ngàn của Ireland, hoàn hảo để chăn thả gia súc và canh tác các loại nông sản, cây trồng và ngũ cốc. Bờ biển Đại Tây Dương hoang dã mang đến những cơn gió trong lành và cung cấp nước biển sạch để đánh bắt cá. Từ những khởi đầu tự nhiên như thế, chúng tôi mong muốn chia sẻ nông sản của chúng tôi với thế giới để bất kỳ ai yêu thích thực phẩm tốt lành đều có thể thưởng thức. Mỗi ngày, các hộ gia đình và cộng đồng của chúng tôi đều thức dậy với một mục đích rõ ràng: làm nông, đánh bắt cá và sản xuất với tinh thần cẩn trọng, sự cam kết và sự tôn trọng truyền thống không đổi được gìn giữ qua nhiều thế hệ. Và thông qua tư cách thành viên của chương trình thực phẩm bền vững quốc gia hàng đầu của Ireland, Origin Green, công việc của họ được đánh giá và thẩm tra độc lập để thúc đẩy các cải tiến liên tục trong các lĩnh vực như an toàn thực phẩm, truy xuất nguồn gốc, sức khỏe và phúc lợi động vật, bảo vệ môi trường và quy trình sản xuất, để sản xuất thực phẩm có lợi hơn vừa cho hành tinh của chúng ta, vừa cho con người. Thực phẩm thiên nhiên ngọt lành cho hôm nay và mai sau. Vậy nếu bạn có thắc mắc về nguồn gốc thực phẩm và thức uống từ Ireland thì giờ bạn biết rồi đấy. Nơi mà chúng tôi làm việc thuận hòa với thiên nhiên, chẳng nơi nào trên thế giới có thể sánh bằng. Khắp mọi miền thế giới, người ta thích san sẻ món ăn và thức uống họ yêu thích. Và càng lúc họ dần cảm thấy thích thú với những câu chuyện kể về nguồn gốc và cách thức sản xuất. Tại hòn đảo Ireland này, ở bên rìa châu Âu, chúng tôi toàn tâm đầu tư vào mọi khía cạnh của thực phẩm và đồ uống tốt lành của chúng tôi và muốn kể cho thế giới nghe về điều đó. Mỗi câu chuyện khởi đầu rất giống nhau, với sự kết hợp hoàn hảo giữa môi trường tự nhiên và cách chúng tôi làm việc thuận hòa với thiên nhiên. Lượng mưa dồi dào nuôi dưỡng những đồng cỏ xanh tươi và các nông trang bạt ngàn của Ireland, hoàn hảo để chăn thả gia súc và canh tác các loại nông sản, cây trồng và ngũ cốc. Bờ biển Đại Tây Dương hoang dã mang đến những cơn gió trong lành và cung cấp nước biển sạch để đánh bắt cá. Từ những khởi đầu tự nhiên như thế, chúng tôi mong muốn chia sẻ nông sản của chúng tôi với thế giới để bất kỳ ai yêu thích thực phẩm tốt lành đều có thể thưởng thức. Mỗi ngày, các hộ gia đình và cộng đồng của chúng tôi đều thức dậy với một mục đích rõ ràng: làm nông, đánh bắt cá và sản xuất với tinh thần cẩn trọng, sự cam kết và sự tôn trọng truyền thống không đổi được gìn giữ qua nhiều thế hệ. Và thông qua tư cách thành viên của chương trình thực phẩm bền vững quốc gia hàng đầu của Ireland, Origin Green, công việc của họ được đánh giá và thẩm tra độc lập để thúc đẩy các cải tiến liên tục trong các lĩnh vực như an toàn thực phẩm, truy xuất nguồn gốc, sức khỏe và phúc lợi động vật, bảo vệ môi trường và quy trình sản xuất. Để sản xuất thực phẩm có lợi hơn vừa cho hành tinh của chúng ta, vừa cho con người. Thực phẩm thiên nhiên ngọt lành cho hôm nay và mai sau. Vậy nếu bạn có thắc mắc về nguồn gốc thực phẩm và thức uống từ Ireland thì giờ bạn biết rồi đấy. Nơi mà chúng tôi làm việc thuận hòa với thiên nhiên, chẳng nơi nào trên thế giới có thể sánh bằng. Khắp mọi miền thế giới, người ta thích san sẻ món ăn và thức uống họ yêu thích. Và càng lúc họ dần cảm thấy thích thú với những câu chuyện kể về nguồn gốc và cách thức sản xuất. Tại hòn đảo Ireland này, ở bên rìa châu Âu, chúng tôi toàn tâm đầu tư vào mọi khía cạnh của thực phẩm và đồ uống tốt lành của chúng tôi và muốn kể cho thế giới nghe về điều đó. Mỗi câu chuyện khởi đầu rất giống nhau, với sự kết hợp hoàn hảo giữa môi trường tự nhiên và cách chúng tôi làm việc thuận hòa với thiên nhiên. Lượng mưa dồi dào nuôi dưỡng những đồng cỏ xanh tươi và các nông trang bạt ngàn của Ireland, hoàn hảo để chăn thả gia súc và canh tác các loại nông sản, cây trồng và ngũ cốc. Bờ biển Đại Tây Dương hoang dã mang đến những cơn gió trong lành và cung cấp nước biển sạch để đánh bắt cá. Từ những khởi đầu tự nhiên như thế, chúng tôi mong muốn chia sẻ nông sản của chúng tôi với thế giới để bất kỳ ai yêu thích thực phẩm tốt lành đều có thể thưởng thức. Mỗi ngày, các hộ gia đình và cộng đồng của chúng tôi đều thức dậy với một mục đích rõ ràng: làm nông, đánh bắt cá và sản xuất với tinh thần cẩn trọng, sự cam kết và sự tôn trọng truyền thống không đổi được gìn giữ qua nhiều thế hệ. Và thông qua tư cách thành viên của chương trình thực phẩm bền vững quốc gia hàng đầu của Ireland, Origin Green, công việc của họ được đánh giá và thẩm tra độc lập để thúc đẩy các cải tiến liên tục trong các lĩnh vực như an toàn thực phẩm, truy xuất nguồn gốc, sức khỏe và phúc lợi động vật, bảo vệ môi trường và quy trình sản xuất. Để sản xuất thực phẩm có lợi hơn vừa cho hành tinh của chúng ta, vừa...
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone joining our first webinar in Vietnam. Good afternoon to the representative from the Vietnamese government, and good morning to the Irish meat exporters and our colleagues in the Irish Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, who are also joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. My name is Marion Rogan, and I'm facilitating the webinar today. I manage the EU Pork and Beef Programme in the Irish Food Board alongside Jack Hogan. And just like to say, we do understand that the Vietnam Central region has been hit recently quite badly by typhoons. So I just hope all your families are safe. So with the COVID restrictions affecting us all, we believe it's important to reach out to you. So I'll just share now the agenda for today's webinar. Okay, so on our agenda today, we have Ambassador McCulloch giving the opening address, followed by my short introduction. And then I will hand you over to Rupert Claxton, Director at JIRA. Rupert will take us through the impact COVID-19 and ASF is having on the global meat market and examine how it affects the meat trade in Vietnam. After Rupert, Peter Duggan, the Irish Food Board Manager for Pork and Poultry, will present a European and Irish meat update. And I'll say, please feel free to ask a question at any time during the presentations by typing your question into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We will aim to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentations. So I'll hand you over to the Ambassador now.
Good morning, everybody in Dublin. Good afternoon, everybody here in Vietnam. I was just thinking today that this time last year, I was down in Ho Chi Minh City at a Board BIA event focusing on beef and pork. It was my first visit to Ho Chi Minh, and I remember the afternoon well. It was really good. And what a year has changed. We're in a different world now. It seems almost so long ago. COVID-19 has changed our lives fundamentally. And unfortunately, because of international travel restrictions, it's not possible to have an in-person event this year. Now, there's no substitute for meeting in person, but at least we can build a virtual bridge across 10,000 kilometers and 7-hour time difference. On COVID, I have to say what Vietnam has achieved has been remarkable. It's a country of 97 million people and just 1,200 cases, of which roughly half are imported cases and flights picked up in mandatory quarantine. But that has come at a price in terms of the sacrifice and the impact on business and on livelihoods, particularly from the travel restrictions, but also from global supply disruption. I think today it's timely to have a look at where things stand in the meat sector against the backdrop of COVID-19, but also against the backdrop of African swine fever. Now that all sounds desperately gloomy, but it's not all doom and gloom on the business front, and there are reasons to be cheerful. I think in particular, ratification of the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement gives good reason to be optimistic. The FTA will lead to phasing out of tariffs over time across all goods, including in particular across agricultural goods. So prices will be more competitive in Vietnam, in Ireland, and in the rest of the EU. And also red tape will be reduced, and that makes it easier to do business. So hopefully this will benefit business in both our countries and in the EU generally, and benefit the consumer as well. Trade between Ireland and Vietnam, I suppose, is best described as modest, but we're confident that we can grow this. We can grow it through events like this, which help to raise awareness of Ireland, full stop, but of what we can offer. And also the embassy has a role here to play in terms of securing market access. We've worked on this over a number of years, and are currently working on beef. But today's focus is on food. It's one of my favorite topics. It's also something that Ireland particularly excels at. Ireland is a small green island with a small population. We're off the west coast of Europe. And that small population, less than 5 million people, you could fit us all into Hanoi or fit us all into Ho Chi Minh and have room left over. But we produce a lot of food. We're very good at that. We produce enough food to feed 25 million people. But it's not all about quantity, it's also about quality, and our food is produced to a very high standard. In part, that reflects the impact of technology and research, but it also reflects tradition. You know, farming in Ireland, it's very much a small family farm type business with generations working the land. And you don't have to look too far in Ireland to find a connection to the land. I mean, my father grew up, I'm a city guy, but my father grew up on a farm, my wife grew up on a farm. So, you know, there is that connection to the land, the love of farming and the love of producing good food. So we have a lot of expertise in this, and we want to share our products, but we also share our expertise. I mean, the embassy runs a development cooperation program, and we work with universities here, and we've also worked with NAFIQuad on food safety. Vietnam has over the years been a favourite destination for Irish ministers, particularly ministers for agriculture. They can't travel at the moment, but when COVID-19 international travel restrictions are lifted, I'm confident that there will be more visits. The other point that gives me confidence is the presence here of not just one, but 2 Irish state agencies. Board BIA has a small presence here since last year, and Enterprise Ireland opened an office in Ho Chi Minh City. So I think this is a mark of Ireland's confidence in how we can grow trade with Vietnam. The recent reports on the vaccine are promising. We've all got our fingers crossed, hoping that this will be the preventive measure and that we'll be able to bring our lives back to normal in the near future. Before I finish, I just want to say, Marion mentioned there about the flooding in central Vietnam, and it's been a cause of of great sadness to us here in the embassy, because we have long and established links with Quanchi province, where I visited in July, and we've already extended our condolences to the government here and to Quanchi province. We're also providing additional funding for flood relief, about €250,000, and we'll give more next year for the recovery. So, as I say, it's no substitute having a webinar as opposed to a meeting in person. I hope next year that it will be possible to meet in person, and that I'll get a chance to go to another promotion event, perhaps in Ho Chi Minh, and have another good afternoon and meet some more people. But in the meantime, I hope you have a useful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your time there, and the Ambassador will stay with us for some questions and answers later. So I'll just share my screen now with you. I would like to share with you the Board BA Meet team involved with the Vietnamese market. Many of you have met with Declan Fennell and Jack Hogan at last year's seminar in Ho Chi Minh. And Kieran Gallagher is the director responsible for Southeast Asia and Vietnam. And Malcolm Leoy works as part of his team. And we realize that since COVID started, you do face a variety of new challenges in the meat industry in Vietnam, and we want to let you know that you have our support. Please feel free to contact any of our team around issues concerning pork imports. EU exports to Vietnam have performed well in 2019, with agri-food exports in 2019 totaling 1.1 billion. Of that, dairy exports account for 187 million, seafood 88 million, and pork exports were 80 million. And as the Ambassador just said there about the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which was signed in 2019, is important and will eliminate tariffs on frozen pork meat after 7 years and tariffs on beef after 3 years. I want to highlight the key attributes of Irish pork to reassure you of its high quality. We call Ireland the safe food island of Europe. Ireland is predominantly a food producing nation on the western edge of Europe, with 13 billion of agri-food exports last year. Our island status and our 1,500 kilometres of coastline is a strong natural defence against the spread of viruses and diseases, for example, African swine fever. It is important to note that we have no wild boar population in Ireland. Irish pigs then are fed mainly locally sourced high quality grain from quality assured sources. Our pigs are processed at 6 months and as a result produce tender meat. Our pork processors produce consistent cuts and are flexible in working to customer specification. It's a fact that Ireland, with a population of 5 million people, has nearly 7 million cattle. We are the largest net exporter of beef in the Northern Hemisphere, with a strong global reputation. Irish beef has a reputation for quality and a grass-fed diet, a natural grazing environment, and a tradition of animal husbandry deliver beef that is tender in texture and rich in flavour. Obviously, 2020 is a challenging year for us all as COVID-19 continues on, but we are glad to hear the positive news on the vaccine front, and we look forward to meeting you at FHV and future seminars once the opportunity allows for it. In the meantime, I'll hand you over to Rupert Claxton from Gira Food Consultancy. Rupert is a strategy consultant with Gira for the past 17 years, specialising in global meat markets. Rupert produces the Gira Asia Meat Club report.
Good morning, and Marion, thank you for the kind introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here talking to you at such an interesting time of year in the global meat industry. And as Marion said, I spent the last 17 years studying Asia and the global industry and how meat supply and availability changes around the world. Gira as a company is just celebrating its 50th year, working specifically in the food area, mostly in meat, but also dairy and some baked products. So I've got about 20 minutes to share with you some really interesting thoughts on what's going on and to try and give you some comfort on what's happening in and around the global market. And to do that, I've got to show you the big picture, what happens at a global level, where we are today, and then bring it back to what does it mean in the supply chain at the moment in Vietnam. And I know you are in the midst of a crisis in pork. So before we get into the ASF discussion, I just want to put up a poll question to see if everyone's out there, to see how COVID is impacting your business. And so hopefully a multiple choice question will appear on the screen. And that will give us a chance just to see where we're at. So polling question, very simple. How is COVID affecting your business? Has it had a severe impact, a moderate impact, or a limited impact? And while you're answering that, I mean, to be clear, in Vietnam, you've done a very good job of controlling the spread of COVID compared to what we've seen around most of the rest of the world. China also got on top of COVID quickly, and I'll show you that briefly in the presentation and talk about how it's impacting the rest of us. In Europe, we are still struggling with it. We are in the midst of a second wave. And so do the results of that come up? So there we go. So very clear that for most of you, it's having some impact. For all of you, it's having some impact. And for most of you, it's having a moderate to severe impact. And that's not surprising. We know that you are missing tourism inbound to Vietnam, both from Europe, US, China, and also that you're seeing a reduction in export demand from those markets as they struggle with it themselves. So if we get back to my 20 minutes, and there is a lot to talk about. So what I want to do, global overview, then talk a little bit about before COVID and the impact of ASF and what that means, because that really set the tone as we came into the year. And then to look at the impact of COVID and then the global supply boom, and then really the challenges around meeting the trade that China is creating. Who's got availability? And I know to date, there hasn't been that much imported, but the volumes are really ramping up for Vietnam. And then leave you with a few final thoughts. And there'll be a handout of this available through Board Beer, so you'll be able to come back and ask for a bit more detail should you want it. So don't worry about the pace. The point here, this shows total global consumption of meat. And what you see over the last decade is a consistent rise between 1.5% and 2.5% per annum. Most of that comes from chicken and pork. Pork was rising very strongly because of what was happening in China. Big growth in pork demand in China and domestic production. Chicken is really driving what happens in the rest of the world. And then we come to 2019. The spread of ASF in China and then onwards into Vietnam means that we get a drop of production in global terms in pork. And then we see it again in 2020, where really it bottoms, despite the fact that we're still grappling with ASF spreading in some markets. In Vietnam, it's very much spread and across the country, and you're dealing with it being endemic. But in somewhere like the Philippines, it is still spreading. There are still parts of the country that haven't experienced it. Meanwhile, beef and sheep meat is fairly stable. We're seeing a small increase in both, in terms of both production and consumption. But it takes a lot longer to invest and the attractiveness hasn't been there. So there is more supply stress on those products as demand around the world increases. If we look at this from another perspective and we talk about trade, China's short about 27 million tons of pork this year due to ASF. Total global trade in 2018 was only 8.2 million tons. That's this number in the pink. You see, as we go through 19 and 20, we get really big step changes in the pork trade. That's because China is pulling that product in. Most of that gain goes to China. They rob it off domestic markets. So the Spanish will take it from theirs. The Germans take it from theirs. They also divert it. So somewhere like the Philippines doesn't get as much. We see there isn't as much availability for Vietnam as there would have been, and prices are higher. And so that's commonplace at the moment. The point is there is not enough meat in the global trade to fill the gap that we're seeing in China today. And that's causing the stress that we see for everybody. So before COVID-19, there was ASF, and the world is about ASF. So just to give you some perspective, this is total pig meat production by country. And we've just picked out the bigger ones here. And really with the focus on Asia. So this is China, the biggest producer in the world. The EU, which is this next blue line. And you can see the EU pork production is now plateaued, and because of environmental constraints, because of the increased emphasis in Europe on sustainability, pork production is plateaued. In fact, it will trend down slowly over the next 5 to 10 years. China crashes because of ASF. That's this loss of 27 million tons. And then in the US, because they keep pushing for economies of scale because of the intensive system, then we find that there is a steady increase in production. In fact, it's beginning to outpace domestic demand. and we find the US have more available at export. And Vietnam here probably a little overstated, but down and then down more steeply in 2020 because of the impacts of ASF. And now we go into a rebuild program. So we know as we get towards this end of 2020, we're seeing a recovery in production in Vietnam on the big farms, but the backyard really struggles. So those three markets, ringed in the Philippines, all have ASF. In fact, the downturn in production in the Philippines is really going to be apparent this year and next. It's not in these figures yet. And these figures are reflecting the world without COVID. So we did them earlier in the year. And then if we just zoom in onto the other markets, generally there is an increase globally in pork production. Here you see the downturn in the Philippines a bit more obvious when we take China out of the scale. Thailand's still clear. Apparently, chance of Thailand having ASF and also needing to import. And the big high-value markets of Japan and Korea up here in these pink and purple lines, they're pretty stable. CPTPP trade deal means that, in fact, we're going to see a bit more import in the next 5 years into those markets. And again, the concern around ASF and South Korea have had ASF, they've dealt with it, and production continues effectively. But what does it mean for global trade? And I think that's one of the more important things to worry about here is who's importing. So what we're looking at here is just imports into Asia as a region in whole. It's a big net importer, very important to global trade because of the value paid for cuts that aren't well valorized in either the US or European markets. And it's very clear that even without ASF, China was the big importer, but with ASF, China becomes really the dominant market. You can see that Japan has been a long-term stable core market for exporters. And it's one of the things for Vietnam to look at is that there is a country that has protected its domestic production, but at the same time has allowed imports to play a really important role in making sure that they have a sustainable and affordable supply of meat, not just of pork. So we see that across the market. And that's good news. And if we just zoom in and we take out of that picture China and Japan, then we can see a little bit of where Vietnam is at. It's this grey strip at the top. And volumes have been steadily increasing. But the reality is to date, they've been very low level. The expectation with ASF is that they will play a much bigger role over the next 5 years. And that's because you're not going to be able to rebuild your domestic pork supply as fast as China is doing. And in fact, in 5 years' time, China will nearly have done that. And there'll be more pork available again on the world market. And the prices will fall. So good news there is that the prices will ease, but they're not going to ease in the next couple of years. More supply coming towards Vietnam in that period. And so we start to think about where we will be 5 years down the road. Now, very clear that ASF is the big story. This chart is slightly outdated. Really good response in Vietnam in terms of getting on top of ASF. But we also know that there are still reservoirs of the disease around, and the expectation is that for the backyard industry, it will be very difficult in the long term to remain in the business. ASF makes that nearly impossible. The one that's caught everyone on the hop a little bit this year has been the move in Europe in September. So here you see this map was August, and it's just come over into this part of Germany. So Germany now has ASF. I'll show you that in the next slide. And it means that Germany loses its export access, but it is for now just here. It was inevitable it would happen at some point this year. What does it mean for the Germans? So the slide here is slightly out of date. It was one case of wild boar that caused one case of ASF and wild boar that caused the disruption. They now have multiple cases in wild boar, but only in that region of Germany close to the Polish border. They are putting up fences and attempting to eradicate it. We saw a similar situation in Belgium 2 years ago. Belgium has dealt with it. They are now free from ASF again, and they are beginning to reopen markets. On the strength of that one case, Korea, Japan, Philippines, and Taiwan banned German pork instantly for product that was slaughtered after the date that wild boar was found. China followed a day later. And if you look at where the Germans export their pork to, jumping forward there, then you can see that, okay, in Europe, like in Vietnam, we accept the concept of regionalization. So we allow product to move around within Europe as long as it comes from other areas of that country, not from the area affected. But China, Korea, and Japan are the major non-European export markets for German pork. In fact, if we went to offal, it's more than 50% of the trade. that product has been turned back into the European market. And so we find that it's damaging the price in Europe. We're also finding an increased availability of German product turning up in the Vietnamese market. The other thing that I haven't got into here that we're seeing is that with COVID restrictions from China on exporting plants at the moment, we're seeing a number of plants shut down or losing their access temporarily to China. And so there is a bit more product around in the world market disrupting prices and causing chaos. Regionalization is really important. We need to get to a point globally where it's accepted. And here I'm just showing the chart for offal that I referred to on the previous slide. And you can see that in terms of offal, it's over 50% is exported into the Asian market and mainly to markets that don't accept it. Hong Kong does accept it. Vietnam does expect it. So you're going to see more availability from Germany in the next few months. But the Germans are, they are hopeful that they will get a deal done with China to accept some sort of protocol that will allow them to go back to trading. And it is worth stressing that it's very rare in Europe that we find ASF on commercial farms or in the meat production system. It is typically a wild boar problem. We have a lot of wild boar in Europe, big open forests that are allowing it to spread west. It will be difficult for the Germans to get it out of their wild boar population. And there is a long-term risk, I'm talking 5 years plus, of it spreading further west into Europe. So what has COVID done to the industry? Very clear that this has been, and I talked last year about ASF being a black swan, a once-in-a-lifetime event. These things don't happen, and then we have two. So COVID is a second black swan. Very disruptive in quite similar ways around the world. And when we started tracking consumer buying patterns in meat, we found that they were very similar in Asia as to what we saw in Italy and then Spain and the UK. And so we could quite quickly flag ahead of time what was about to happen. But the market just couldn't organize itself at the speed at which COVID moved, but we could see what was happening. And so you see that here, and the detail isn't what matters. The understanding of the shift is what I'm really showing you. But we've got China, the US, and Europe detailed here for food service sales. China food service crashes in Q1 because that's when COVID spread. In Europe and the US, it's actually Q2 in 2020 that we see the decline. And in fact, we're getting a secondary hit now in Q4, which when we did this chart wasn't shown because we're seeing lockdown happen again. And in fact, where I am in the UK, all the pubs and restaurants are once again forced to be closed with a hope of being open within the next 2 weeks, maybe. But it's a big maybe. So we get a demand shift into retail. And if you look here, this is the US retail demand shift because they were illustrating it very nicely. And meat sales boomed by 80% at retail. Even so, that wasn't enough to offset the losses that we saw in retail. And then as the people finish panic buying, and in Europe, US, freezers are common, people put stock aside at home, then the retail buying drops back down to 40%. And this is displacing where they would have gone out to food service and eaten out, but now they had it at home. The kind and cut that they bought changed. And as the situation went on, as lockdown ended, the restaurants and pubs opened, not everybody rushes back to food service. And you can see that food service in the figures is still down something like 20%. And we get a slow return. And so retail remains up at about 20%. It's now back down to about 10%. It goes up again as we see these restrictions being brought back in. It wasn't enough to offset the demand loss at food service. And therefore, we had excess that could be exported. And so we see more product coming out of places like Brazil, the US, and Europe onto the world market, a lot of it going to China. Thankfully, China was there to catch it. So this is the first phase, pandemic onset. And to some extent, we're very much still in amongst this. My concern is phase 2, when we go to global economic crash. This is where the job losses that are at the moment being supported by government furlough schemes, job retention schemes, there are a whole range of names. Basically, the governments are paying for people to have money in their pockets. We're going to have to put that money back. It's going to be tax consequences. We're going to see unemployment and therefore lower disposable incomes. We are going to recover differently to a normal recession, I think faster, because this isn't like the 2008 recession. The root cause is very different. But we're going to go through probably a 5-year period where disposable income isn't where it was. And so demand around the world is going to be lower. We have to factor that in. The other thing to factor in is that in the summer, everyone reacted like we were out of this. July and August, the world is getting better. We are very much back in the second wave in Europe. It has arrived. It's in the US. Arguably, they never got out of it. And so the challenges are still there around the world. This is still a problem we are very much grappling with. We are hopeful that there are vaccines coming. But the reality is that to get enough vaccine to vaccinate the world is not going to be something that happens in the next month, 6 months, probably not the next year, but we are working towards a process where we come out of this. And so if you look at the total cases around the world and how various countries have fared, you can see China has done very well in controlling it. They've been very strong on it and their measures remain very strong. The US down here in the bottom left, you can see that they've never got on top of it. That's been a continual geographic spread. We see the hotspots coming back to where they were. Ireland has been through a first wave and is really getting on top of the second wave. So they are proactive, have done a good job. And Brazil, another big supplier of meat in the world, again, not back on top of it, but we are seeing a slowdown in cases. The thing to look at is the caseload here. The US is in the millions. China was in the thousands, as has Ireland been. And if we look at the Vietnamese situation, then we're talking a little over 1,000 cases, 1,200 cases public. So they might be higher, but the case in Vietnam is very different to the rest of the world. Your issue with this is really about the economic impact on exports. China not buying fish in the early phase, leading to the filling up of freezers in Vietnam. Are the manufacturing products that you're seeing now and the growth and investment in people like LG and Samsung in the country, is demand going to be at that level for those products around the world next year? And so we need to start to think about what that might mean in terms of jobs in Vietnam and the demand for meat in the country. China's import boom, and I know I'm tracking down through my time pretty fast here, really huge price surge in China, and that's this red line, and this one's the pork price. And if I just show you the same thing for poultry, then we see the same thing. COVID really crashes prices back down all over the world. So we've got Europe here in blue, we've got the green of the US and the yellow of Brazil. But prices then ramp back up as we see demand around the world going back towards the Chinese market, trade demand, and the recovery of food service. Brazil stays down because we're in US dollars and there's been a real depreciation of the Brazilian real. So products out of Brazil are cheap because of the exchange rate effect at the moment. Where is all the pork going? It's going to China. And this just shows you the monthly imports into China. And you can see pre-COVID, normal month into China, pre-COVID, pre-ASF and pre-COVID, to be fair, was under 100,000 tons. At the moment, we're shipping over 400,000 tons a month into the Chinese market from a range of exporters. Notably, Europe is very strong. Germany in red here is now out of the market. Spain is increasing. Challenge in the availability. And what it's done is drive that global price up to a really high level. If we look at it for poultry, then we see a very similar trend. And the reason I'm stressing this is why you are finding there is not the availability of products you would like to buy on the world market, and the prices are higher. As China recovers its production of pork, we'll find that those prices come back down, the availability will increase, and Vietnam will have access to more pork. And that will be a gradual process over the next 3 to 4 years. For now, you need to look to other suppliers and to build bridges. I mean, there are good traders out there that you should be developing a relationship with. The US has damaged the Chinese prices. The point on this slide, they've been shipping bush legs, so it's a chicken leg quarter at about $500 a ton product weight. That's FOB in the US. You've got to pay shipping on that. In terms of pork imports into Vietnam, this is, for me, really interesting. I'm nearly at the end of what I've got to say. As ASF swept into the country, a trend to increase the import of pork, which was already there, has suddenly surged. You haven't got the domestic product available. It is an important meat in the market. It is the most important meat after fish. And so we see that the shippers that are strongest are those countries that have got restrictions into China, or their companies that haven't got a license from their plant. And then we've got others who are really looking to develop alternative outlets to China. And that's becoming more apparent now, that companies are looking to offset their exposure in China by developing other avenues. And that's where the interest comes in. So strong growth, really strong monthly growth into Vietnam. Infrastructure on the inbound side in Vietnam is also an issue. haven't got the distribution for the cold chain at the moment. That's true for offal, and you can see offal's a bit more limited. You haven't got the freezer centers. You don't have the mindset in the food service market, the small restaurants, to go and buy it. They're still very much aligned with wet markets. That is going to boom in the next 5 years. So the ability to trade and move more product more easily in the country will be a massive gain. If we look at beef, then we see actually beef into Vietnam, really Brazil was the main player, and they've started shipping more into the Chinese market. And so your availability is really constrained. And we see the same on the right-hand side there. We've taken India out of the picture because India transships through Vietnam, but tight availability into the market. And for me, that challenges beef is expensive, and there is a limited amount globally. And if you can find other sources, you should explore those now. So an awful lot to get through in not very long. I'm going to leave you quickly with a few final thoughts. We know that ASF is the problem today, despite what's going on with COVID. It's not a direct issue from COVID, but your economic drag you need to watch next year. Is there going to be as much export potential? ASF is the #1 issue, and the rebuilding of large commercial farms and slaughter plants to go with them from people like Vasan are happening. CP are investing. We know JAP are investing. We've spoken to a number of those people, but they are not going to get there in the next 7 to 8 years. You have a long-term need to import pork into the market, and where you buy that from is important to understand. China continues to compete, but it will get less over the next 5 years. But for now, it is driving up prices. Vietnam is a very good alternative market for exporters. Country lacks infrastructure. I've said that. It will improve, but you need to look at how to facilitate the movement of imported product through the market and to look after the quality of it as it goes through that market, so that you have a brand that you can be proud of, so that you can guarantee the quality that you are importing from markets around the world. Because when it's exported and it goes in the freezer containers, it's very good. You need to help your market understand how that product works and how they can use it to their advantage. Vietnam's potential to become an exporter of manufactured products is huge. And so we think that realistically, demand growth in Vietnam over the next 10 years is going to be very positive. You just have a short blip as we go through COVID to deal with. So lots of good things in there. A really interesting outlook for Vietnam. And I look forward to spending more time talking to people in Vietnam and working with Vietnam. So thank you for your time. And I probably need to stop sharing my screen because I'm hogging the controls. If I can remember how to do it. Sorry, Marion, technology.
No worries.
Why is it hidden it? I've lost my, there we go. Apologies.
Thanks, Rupert, for that really interesting update. Yeah, and as Rupert said, we will share his slides with the group as well afterwards. So moving on now, I want to introduce you to Peter Duggan, and Peter is the manager for pork and poultry in Board BIA. He's with the Irish Food Board for the past 11 years, and initially as a business analyst and now as sector manager. So Peter will focus on an update on the European and Irish meat trade. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Marion, for that introduction. Just before I begin, I'd just like to say good morning to everybody tuning in from Ireland, and and good afternoon to everybody tuning in from Vietnam. So there is a poll question here that should appear shortly in front of you. I'll just wait for it to appear, but it's just around, do you purchase Irish pork? And there should be 3 options. Yes, they're appearing there now. Yes, I buy Irish pork on a regular basis. I buy it sometimes, and no, I'm considering to purchase Irish pork. So it's a very interesting topic at the moment, because obviously in Europe we exported around 70,000 tons to Vietnam for the first 8 months of this year. And as Rupert said there, that there's great potential in the Vietnamese market, and hopefully it'll grow further. So yeah, like some interesting results there. 50% of you are saying that you haven't purchased pork yet. So hopefully that might change in the future. And obviously there's some positives there as well, where 42% of you say that you're occasionally purchasing pork. So that's a positive result. So without any further ado, I'll get into this presentation. So I suppose the layout of the presentation will center around pig meat initially, and then I'll move into the beef sector, and then I'll discuss further developments, I suppose, in the Irish meat sector. So for Europe then, for the meat sector, the EU 27 region is the second largest pork producer after China, as Rupert alluded to in his presentation. We are the third largest beef producer globally. We produce food and meat to the very highest food safety standards. And I suppose an example of that is we prohibit the use of growth hormones in the EU 27 region. And lastly, then, COVID-19 has had a very significant economic impact on the region. In particular, the food service channel has been particularly badly impacted. And I suppose for the pig meat category, we have been fortunate in that we do have a safety valve of international markets where we have exported a significant amount of pig meat year to date. So net production of pig meat in the EU 27 region is anticipated to increase modestly for 2020 to around 23 million tons. There has been some decline in pig meat production for the first half of the year, but that was largely due to some of the impact of COVID-19. But across the region, the impact of COVID-19 has been less severe in the second half of the year compared to the first half of the year. As I mentioned, consumption is set to fall by around 3%, and most of that consumption has been impacted by the disruption in the food service channel. However, retail sales are strong, and they have helped to offset some of that decline in the food service channel. Pig meat is Ireland's third most important agricultural sector after dairy and beef. We export around 60% of what we produce to over 40 markets. So for 2019, we exported around 254,000 tons, which had a value of around 966 million. We produce around 3.8 million pigs per annum. We have a small producer base though. We have around 400 producers, but of these producers, they are extremely efficient and some of the largest producers, in fact, in Europe. Our pigs are typically lighter and younger, whereas maybe in some European countries where they're curing their hams for up to 6 months, they need heavier legs. So for the first 8 months of the year, Irish pig meat exports are around 7% below 2019 levels. Exports to the UK are 22% lower, and the main reason for this is that we do import some product which ends up being re-exported. So that's the reason for that significant decline there. And year to date, our pig supplies are running around 2% higher. Just to reiterate what Marion said about the Irish pig sector, we have an island position which helps our biosecurity. In particular, with African swine fever. We have we don't have a wild boar population, whereas in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, there are significant problems with wild boar, as Rupert alluded to. We have farms that are located throughout the country. The advantage of having farms located throughout the country is that our pig population is not densely populated. So that helps us with our biosecurity and minimizing the disease exposure that we might potentially have. As I mentioned, we have highly efficient family-owned operations, and we have the highest proportion of 1,000+ sow units in Europe. We produce our pig meat to the very highest production standards, which are linked to internationally accredited schemes. So just moving on to the beef sector then for Europe. Production of beef is set to decline by around 2% to 7 million tons. Consumption is set to fall by over 2%, and that really reflects what's happening in the food service category. And again, similar to pig meat, the strong performance in the retail channel is helping to offset the decline in the food service category. So Ireland is the largest net exporter of beef in the Northern Hemisphere. We export around 560,000 tons, which has a value of around 2.1 billion per annum. We have around 100,000 farms who are involved in beef production. We have a strong history of beef production in Ireland. The main reason for this is around 80% of our land area is covered in grass, and grass gives us an advantage in terms of being able to produce beef at a competitive advantage in comparison to our European counterparts. And lastly, then we have a modern dynamic processing industry similar to the pig meat industry as well. So to date in 2020, Irish beef exports are running around 7% below 2019 levels. Most significantly, exports to the UK have been 12% lower, and reflecting that figure really is the decline in the food service category that we've seen in the last number of months in response to COVID. And overall, our cattle throughput then has fallen by just 1% year to date. So in terms of the further advancements piece then, at the moment, we are transitioning from quality assurance schemes to sustainable assurance scheme. Our beef and lamb scheme is now a sustainable assurance scheme. And for pig meat, from Q1 next year, we hope that our quality assurance scheme will be a sustainable assurance scheme. So within the quality assurance scheme, what we would cover off is traceability, use of veterinary products, animal feed, welfare, animal health. But by transitioning towards a sustainable assurance scheme, we're adding in environment. And basically what we want to do is we want to show our customers what we're doing in terms of mitigating against potential environmental damage and showing that Irish farmers care about the environment, and we are actually doing a lot of things at the moment to help the environment. So we just need to measure that, and that's what we are doing at the moment. So again, this sustainable assurance scheme then is accredited to international schemes such as the ISO scheme and to Carbon Trust. On top of that, we have the Origin Green Programme. So this is the first national sustainability programme. And it will incorporate both what the farmers are doing under the Sustainable Assurance Scheme, but also combine that with what the food industry is doing. So the food industry makes commitments every year in terms of reducing their energy usage, reducing water usage, and then making commitments to corporate social responsibility in terms of helping their local community. So again, this is accredited and verified to international standards. And then just on the grass-fed scheme that we've just launched, it was developed by Borbia and key stakeholders to provide proof points and a point of differentiation. And how we can do this is we are doing this through our sustainable assurance scheme. So we will be able to measure the amount of grass that is being utilized by our cattle. So as I mentioned earlier, 80% of our island is covered in grass, so we do have a competitive advantage. And for any product that carries this grass-fed logo, we are committing that 90% of the food or the feed consumed is linked to grass. And the big advantage then is that you can be assured that there's going to be excellent visual appearance and excellent eating quality, and the nutrition will be top class. And then just finally on the Lean Pygmies producer program. This is an initiative that was launched back in 2018. And it's basically around helping pig producers to improve their system of production. And by improving their systems of production, that will also help reduce costs, increase their output, and also help the environment. And we're working with these producers on a routine basis, and we also visit Center of Excellence sites. So in 2019, we visited Denmark to see what they were doing in terms of lean production. So that more or less finishes up my presentation on the meat market situation both in Europe and Ireland, and I'm happy to take any questions as well after this.
Thank you, Peter, for the European and Irish meat update. That was very interesting. So now we're moving on to just the questions and answers phase. So I encourage you to ask questions. I'll just show you where that is. So if you look at the Q&A or question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, please ask easy questions or difficult questions. We're open to taking them all. Okay, and while we are taking your questions and translating them, we will show you a short video on the high standards in Irish pig farming.
From a young age, I never really wanted anything else. In 2012, I took over the family farm and I built a brand new pig unit from scratch. We're always striving to improve things. Biosecurity is very important on the farm. The gates are locked at night, the workers, they shower in and out, and they make sure they wear the protective clothing at all times. The animals are very protected. These are all enclosed units. Pigs are very clean and playful, and to me, all animals should be well cared for. A stress-free environment is key, and to ensure this, the pigs have natural daylight and they have a good space to lie out. We also have enrichments to keep the pigs occupied. There are heat pads if the pig requires more heat. The optimum temperature for the shed is 24 degrees and the heat is controlled automatically. There are also fans in every room and fresh air vents in the walls. I can access all these systems over the phone. The computerized feeding system starts feeding the pigs at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then it feeds the pigs throughout the day. The feeding program varies for different ages of the pigs and the different stages of pregnancy. Feed for the pigs is mainly locally sourced. And the lorry is clean, it's washed and disinfected, and that's most important for the biosecurity. As part of the pig quality assurance scheme, I get audited every 18 months. The audit checks that everything meets the EU quality standard and makes sure that the pig has full traceability. From start to finish, I aim to produce a very high standard here for the consumer. I'm proud of our biosecurity, the welfare of our pigs, and the high quality standards in our farms. And we're producing a product that is appreciated all over the world.
Thank you for that. So just looking at some of the questions that have come in. Owen has a question for Rupert first. What is your views on pork output for 2021 from US, China and EU? I can't hear Rupert, yeah. Sorry, Rupert, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks, Rupert.
Right,
Yes,
okay.
You're through, yeah.
Apologies. It's a really good question from Owen. More supply next year is likely, but the demand from China remains there, so we don't see a lot of reduction in stress. The US production has plateaued this year. It should have grown. It's a result of COVID and the lack of confidence in the sector. So from the US, we're expecting to see more production next year. In Europe, we're going to see a little bit less because there is a long-term downward trend in terms of production, and that's a weak confidence in the EU production centre, especially in Germany, where the farmers have been looking ahead at that ASF and they were aware they had a problem coming. China, we think China really bottomed out. If you took Chinese production on a monthly basis, in terms of ASF, it bottomed in November, December 2019. It went down further in January and February because of COVID. They are already rebuilding production. Now, they're not going to recover anything like what they've lost, but we see it picking up through next year. So we're going to have more in China, more in the US, a little bit less out of Europe. There's also a bit more coming out of Brazil next year and a bit more out of Russia. So hopefully that helps answer that.
Great, thanks, Rupert. I have another question now from one of our Vietnamese attendees. So probably for Peter, could you please share more information on Board Bia business in Vietnam, please?
Yeah, thanks, Marion. Yeah, I suppose like in terms of what we're doing in Vietnam at the moment, obviously we have the EU campaign where we have a number of different trade shows, the trade seminars, and obviously this webinar where we're trying to introduce Vietnamese customers to Irish systems of production and obviously the meat industry as well. Besides that, we have feet on the street presence where we're trying to connect with Vietnamese businesses on the ground and make introductions to Irish companies to try and build business and build those relationships. But I suppose it's still a relatively new market for Board Bia, and we're trying to, I suppose, build our presence in that market more and more. So I suppose there's a lot more to do in this market.
Could I ask you, Peter, how many of the Irish pork companies are doing business in Vietnam?
Well, I know there's definitely 2 companies that have done business in Vietnam. Obviously, what Rupert said earlier with the attraction of the Chinese market, obviously prices are are stronger in that market. But there's a lot of potential in the Vietnamese market, for sure, for pig meat. I mentioned at the start of the presentation that they've imported around 70,000 tons. If you compare that to what China imports, it's much lower. But there has been significant growth, albeit off a much lower base. So there is a lot of potential, and obviously the Vietnamese market is, you know, getting a lot stronger in terms of economically as well. So it's a market that we're really interested in, and we want to kind of focus on that market more and more going forward.
Great. And the same lady is just asking which type of meat, pork and beef, has Borbia exported to Vietnam?
Yeah, it's just pig meat to date.
Yeah.
We don't have access for beef yet, but it's just pig meat to date.
I have another question for you, Peter. Pig farms, as you said, are located across the country. So how can you control the biosecurity status of those farms?
Well, I suppose there's a big advantage where they're less densely populated. So that is an advantage in terms of, you know, ensuring that the biosecurity is at a really high standard. Also, in terms of our biosecurity, you know, there's the shower in, there's the shower out, you have to sign in before you go into a farm. So there's a number of different protocols that each of these farms have in place. But I suppose having those farms far apart does help in terms of even kind of equipment or lorries kind of moving around, that you know, there's a better chance of minimizing exposure to diseases.
Yeah, and I think the same person is asking, is there any type of pig production cooperative in Ireland which you can share with us?
Yeah, no, we do have cooperatives, and I'm happy to share those after this presentation with the company in question.
Oh, okay. And I have a question for Rupert now, actually. So just, is ASF under control?
I don't think it's under control anywhere globally. No. If I'm really honest with you, where we've got it in the wild boar populations in Europe, it's exceptionally difficult and expensive to eradicate. There is some limitation of the way that it's spreading. We've managed to slow that down in the European markets where it is, but control would suggest that we were getting towards removing it completely, and I don't see that happening. I suspect the Germans will push back where they've got their problem, and they could eventually get that under control. They would remain at risk of having a further breakdown. But if they can keep it in the area where it is, away from the main pig production, that would be okay. In Asia, if we looked at China, then in China, they haven't reported anything like as much as they've got. But there isn't as much around as there was, because the backyard farms that were really susceptible have swapped over to chicken production, and we've seen the same in Vietnam. To some extent, it's controlling itself because it's burnt through the farms on which it can survive, and those farms are looking at the situation and not coming back into the business at the moment. It is still there. It is still in the soil. It is still in the old pig pens, and there are still vectors in the wild, like wild pigs that we have all over Asia, that continue to spread it. So it's still there. We're just not reporting as much of it at the moment, and COVID is a little bit of the reason for that. People are focused on that at the moment.
Okay. Yep, perfect. Thank you, Rupert. And then somebody is looking for a list of exporters, suppliers for pork meat. So we just have to follow up with that contact. So I've just taken a note of that person. Yeah. Okay. And then I'll just continue on. We have a couple more. One for Peter. It is cold in the winter in Ireland. Yeah, it's getting cold at the moment. What measure do you have to protect the animals?
Yeah, so I suppose in Ireland, look, we for our beef system of production, we would have our stock out for about 9 to 10 months of the year, depending on where those stock are located in the country. But they would be housed then for 2 months or up to 3 months of the year, and yeah, they're fed then indoors, and we feed them silage, or that's in-soiled grass. So yeah, they're well looked after when they're housed for the winter period. The sheds, the accommodation that they're in are extremely good. They're well ventilated, and they don't get much sickness or diseases when they're housed like that.
Okay, another question, Peter. What are the supports for imports of meat into Vietnam?
Just if you could just repeat that question again, Marion, I just missed it.
Yeah, it was, what are the supports for imports of meat into Vietnam?
Look, I suppose what it'll come down to is the price, I guess, and in terms of supports from Borbia, look, in terms of supporting our companies to make those introductions to potential customers, and then vice versa to make customers or potential customers in Vietnam aware of Irish product. And then I suppose it's a commercial conversation after that. Obviously, with the free trade agreement, there's going to be reduction in tariffs over the forthcoming years, which should make Irish pork and European pork more competitive as well.
Okay, and yeah, the same lady who's looking for the list is just saying, where can I buy meats from Ireland? But I think we can, that's a follow-up to that person after this webinar. Now I'll just check this question down here. Yeah, same question. Is there any support in terms of tariff for import meat from Ireland? Which I think, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Peter. I think you've said everything.
No.
Yeah, I'll just check the chat box. Yeah, the trade agreement brings, yeah, it brings tariff liberalizations. Yes, okay, that's fine. Now, if anybody else has a question, I'll just check now. Have I answered everything? I think I've answered everything. I'm just making sure. So, okay, yeah, that seems to be all the questions. Yeah, so really we will try and wrap up now, and I'll just ask you if you can take 2 minutes to give us a quick evaluation, and just if there's any other information you want in terms of future webinars, let us know. So thank you all, and thank the panelists particularly for their time today and for you all to listen in. So I'll just share my screen and just show you where the evaluation is. So if you look in the chat box, the link will be copied into it now. And as I said, it just takes 2 minutes, and then you're in with a chance to win a Teeling's whiskey gift set, which would be nice. So hopefully that's being shared now. Yeah, thank you all very much for your time, and I hope you found the webinar very informative, and hopefully see you sooner rather than later. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll end actually with the Meet the Beef Farmer for Ireland.
Years. It can actually go back 7 generations. And make the most of what we have, what is natural. And then we have to record this tagging with the department. Within a day, we get back a passport for this animal, that this animal will have for life, its own passport. If a cow calves, I'm able to record the calving. I actually have more records of my animals here than I do of myself. We are checked at least every 18 months to increase the sustainability of our farms, to reduce our carbon footprint, and to improve the quality of our beef and lamb. And we are encouraged to improve our environment, to grow new hedgerows, to create habitat for wildlife like birds and bees, and to grow crops which help to improve our soil and our environment. The reason why beef and lamb in this part of Europe is of such high quality is the fact that our climate allows us to feed our cattle outdoors for most of the year on lush green grass. More of a natural diet gives that marbling effect to the meat, which is a nicer flavouring. We care for our animals here. We work with them, we mind them, we know them. We're here to look after them. That's my job. They'll be a lot happier when they're out in their natural environments. It's a healthy way to farm. It's the way it should be done. It's clean, it's healthy. I love working with stock. Our aim as farmers is to hand over the land as good, if not better, than we got it. And we're just minding it for the next generation and the generation after that.